The sun had just begun to lift itself over the horizon, spilling a warm, amber glow across the vast Serengeti. Ethan Hale stepped out of his canvas tent, stretching stiff muscles after a night spent reviewing footage and notes. The early morning air was crisp, laced with the smell of dew-soaked grass and distant dust. For Ethan, this wasn't just another day of filming. Something in the air felt charged, an unspoken tension that made him pause and inhale deeply. He'd been a wildlife filmmaker for more than a decade, traveling to some of the most remote corners of the world. But the Serengeti held a special place in his heart. Here, life and death played out openly, honestly, without the filters of human civilization. He believed the stories captured here could change hearts around the world. For 3 days, Ethan had been tracking a pride known as the Nyaru lions. They were strong, experienced hunters, but what drew him most wasn't the towering male or the fierce lionesses. It was a single cub, barely 4 months old, clumsy, wide-eyed, and endlessly curious. Ethan had spent hours filming the cub's antics, stumbling over its own paws, nipping at grasshoppers, and tangling itself in its mother's tail. But now, as he scanned the plains, a strange stillness hung over the land. No bird calls, no distant roars, no rhythmic thumping of hooves. Ethan shouldered his camera and started walking, his boots sinking into soft soil. Something was wrong, he felt it deep in his bones. And as he followed a trail of small, fresh tracks leading away from the pride's usual resting spot, his heartbeat quickened. The cub had wandered off, and somewhere in this vast wilderness, danger was waiting. Ethan crouched low, studying the tiny paw prints pressed into the dirt. They were spaced farther apart than usual, signs of hurried movement. The cub had been running, but from what, or toward what? He raised his head and scanned the landscape. The tracks led toward a cluster of boulders overlooking a steep ravine, a place no lion cub should ever wander near. A knot tightened in Ethan's stomach. He moved quickly, careful to keep his steps quiet. As he approached the rocks, he heard something, faint but unmistakable, a desperate, high-pitched cry. The sound sliced through the quiet morning like a blade. Ethan broke into a run, scrambling up the slope until he reached the top. What he saw made his breath hitch. The cub was stranded halfway down the ravine, clinging to a thin ledge of crumbling earth. Its tiny claws dug desperately into the dirt as pebbles tumbled into the rushing water below. The river was swollen from last night's storm, churning violently against jagged rocks. One wrong move and the cub would fall. Ethan scanned the area frantically. No lionesses, no male lion, no pride in sight. They had no idea their youngest member was in mortal danger. The cub cried again, louder this time. Its small body trembled with fear, hind legs slipping dangerously close to the edge. Ethan's breath came fast and uneven. As a filmmaker, he had always followed the rule: do not interfere with nature. But this wasn't nature. This was an accident. Preventable death. Another cry echoed against the ravine walls. That was all it took. Ethan dropped his camera. His instincts, human, protective, undeniable, took over. He slid down the rocky slope on his hands and knees, wincing as jagged stone tore at his skin. "Hold on, little one," he whispered through clenched teeth. The cub looked up at him with panicked amber eyes. Ethan's heart pounded harder. There was no time left to think. Only time to act. The ledge crumbled beneath Ethan's boots as he carefully edged toward the terrified cub. Every step sent loose rocks raining into the river below. The current roared violently, ready to swallow anything or anyone that slipped. Ethan pressed his body against the ravine wall and stretched out a hand. "Easy, easy," he murmured, though his own voice shook with adrenaline. The cub's tiny chest heaved with rapid breaths, its back legs sliding dangerously close to open air. The ledge gave a shuddering crack. Ethan lunged. His fingers caught the cub's scruff just as the earth beneath it collapsed completely. The cub let out a sharp yelp, flailing in panic until Ethan clutched it tightly against his chest. But the rescue had come at a price. The collapse sent Ethan's footing spiraling out of control. He slid down the remaining slope, his body scraping against jagged stone before plunging into the icy river with a deafening splash. The water swallowed him instantly. The cold stole his breath. The current seized him like a predator, dragging him downstream toward a cluster of sharp, protruding rocks. He struggled to keep the cub above the surface, the little body pressed tightly against him as he kicked and fought the current. His lungs burned. A submerged log slammed into his ribs, knocking the air from his chest. Ethan gasped, choking on river water. His vision blurred, but he refused to release the cub. Every second in the torrent felt like minutes, long, agonizing minutes. He managed to grab onto a half-submerged tree root jutting from the riverbank. His muscles screamed as he pulled himself upward, dragging both bodies from the water. His clothes clung heavily to him, dripping and cold. He collapsed onto the mud, coughing and shaking, the cub trembling violently in his arms. Ethan wiped water from his eyes and looked around. They were alive. But then he heard another sound. A low, rumbling growl carried across the air. Ethan froze. He lifted his head slowly, and his blood ran cold. Emerging from the tall grass, moving like shadows through gold, were lionesses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and behind them the massive, dark-maned male, the pride, and he was holding their cub. Ethan's breathing hitched as 6 full-grown lions fanned out before him, forming a wide semicircle. Their paws pressed silently into the wet earth, their amber eyes locked onto one thing, the cub in his arms. He was kneeling in the mud with no weapon, no shelter, and nowhere to run. The river roared behind him. The pride controlled the ground before him. He was trapped. The largest lioness stepped forward. Her muscles rippled beneath her tawny coat with every slow, deliberate movement. Her gaze was intense, unblinking. Ethan had filmed lions for years, but nothing compared to having one stare directly into his soul. His mind raced through every wildlife manual he'd studied, every lecture he'd ever attended. Approaching a pride with one of their cubs was one of the most dangerous scenarios imaginable. "Easy," he whispered, voice barely audible. The cub mewed softly. The pride froze at the sound. The lionesses exchanged glances. Short, subtle, instinctive communication. The massive male stepped closer, the earth vibrating beneath his heavy paws. He wasn't roaring or snarling. He was waiting. Ethan swallowed hard. He slowly placed his free hand on the ground, palm open, showing he had no intention of running. The lioness took another step forward, her nose twitching as she caught the cub's scent mixed with river water and fear. The air between them felt electric, charged with danger, confusion, instinct, and something else Ethan couldn't define. The cub squirmed in his arms, reaching its tiny paw toward the lioness. That was the moment everything changed. The lioness's posture softened. Her rigid muscles eased. Her ears, once angled forward in sharp alertness, tilted slightly outward, a sign of curiosity overriding aggression. She moved closer until Ethan could feel the warmth of her breath brushing his cheek. He shut his eyes, prepared for the worst. But the worst did not come. Instead, she gently touched her nose to the cub's head. Then, impossibly, she brushed her head against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan's eyes flew open, disbelief flooding his senses. The lioness inhaled deeply, taking in every bit of the cub's scent, and his. Her whiskers tickled his skin as she leaned closer, inspecting him with the competence of a mother assessing a stranger who had touched her child. Then something extraordinary happened. She chuffed. A soft, vibrating exhale, gentle, almost affectionate. A sound lions used only with cubs or trusted pride members. The other lionesses began to approach, forming a loose circle around Ethan. Their massive bodies moved with fluid grace, but there was no hostility in their steps, only curiosity, and something that resembled recognition. The male lion padded forward, lowering his enormous head until he was eye-level with Ethan. His mane brushed the ground, heavy and imposing. Ethan could feel each exhalation from the lion's nostrils. Warm, powerful, ancient. The cub squeaked softly. The male responded with a deep, resonating rumble that vibrated through Ethan's bones. But it was not a warning. It was acknowledgement. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. He had expected death. Instead, he was witnessing something scientists had long debated but rarely documented: interspecies gratitude. The cub wriggled, and Ethan carefully lowered it to the ground. Immediately, the lionesses converged. They nuzzled the cub, inspected its fur, checked its limbs with gentle nudges. The mother groomed him vigorously, her rough tongue scraping away mud and fear. Then she looked up at Ethan. Their eyes met. In her amber gaze, Ethan saw something unmistakable: understanding, appreciation, trust. One by one, each lioness approached Ethan. They touched their noses to his shoulder or head, marking him with their scent. A gesture of acceptance. A gesture rarely offered to anything outside the pride. The male came last. He stepped forward, a towering figure of raw power and authority. Ethan held his breath as the lion's face came within inches of his own. The world seemed to shrink to that single, impossible moment. The male lion pressed his forehead lightly against Ethan's. It was the lion's version of a thank you. Ethan exhaled shakily, overwhelmed. Around him, the pride relaxed, lying down in the grass as though he were no threat, no intruder, just part of the moment, part of the pride. The cub, still unsteady but recovering quickly, waddled back to Ethan, brushing against his leg before retreating to his mother's side. Ethan laughed breathlessly. The lions had given him something no camera could fully capture. A miracle born from instinct, danger, bravery, and the fragile thread of shared life. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, legs trembling from exhaustion and awe. He knew he needed to leave before overstaying the pride's tolerance. He took one cautious step backward. The matriarch lifted her head. She made a sound Ethan had never heard. A gentle, throaty rumble, neither warning nor greeting. The pride responded instantly. They stood, forming two lines on either side of Ethan. He froze. "No way," he whispered. The lions were flanking him, arranging themselves in a protective formation. An escort. The matriarch stepped into place beside him, her massive head level with his waist. On his opposite side, the male lion matched her position. The other lionesses aligned themselves perfectly, forming a corridor of tawny fur and rippling muscle. A royal procession. For him, Ethan took a hesitant step forward. The pride moved in unison, guiding him safely across the grasslands back toward the ridge where he had dropped his camera. The feeling was indescribable. Every few steps, the cub trotted up beside him, brushing lightly against his leg before scampering back to his mother. Ethan smiled despite the ache in his ribs. Birds took flight overhead. Antelope in the distance paused mid-chew, staring openly at the surreal scene. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the escort continued. When they reached the top of the ridge, the lions finally halted. The matriarch approached Ethan one last time. She lifted her head and pressed her forehead gently to his chest. A single, quiet gesture, the deepest gratitude a lion could offer. Ethan placed a trembling hand against her mane. "You're welcome," he whispered. One by one, the lions turned and walked away, disappearing into the tall grass as silently as they had emerged. The cub was the last to go. He looked back at Ethan, gave a soft mew, then bounded after his family. Ethan stood alone on the ridge, stunned. He had come to film a story. Instead, he had become part of one. Hours later, back at camp, Ethan replayed the footage over and over again. His action camera, still recording when he plunged into the river, had captured nearly everything. The rescue, the standoff, the grooming, the escort. It was unbelievable. He sent the footage to colleagues, wildlife biologists, and conservation experts. Their reactions were immediate and explosive. Dr. Amelia Korshin, an expert in big cat behavior, was the first to call him. "Ethan," she said breathlessly, "this is historic. Lions do not show this level of interspecies tolerance, let alone bond formation. This footage will rewrite what we know." News spread quickly. Documentaries came calling. Scientists requested interviews. Wildlife organizations shared the video worldwide. People reacted with awe. Many cried. Many watched in stunned silence. Many questioned how such a moment was even possible. But Ethan knew. It wasn't magic. It wasn't fantasy. It was empathy. A mother recognizing the life of her cub in the arms of the stranger who saved him. It was a moment that transcended species. A moment that reminded the world that compassion is not exclusive to humans. Ethan returned to the ridge many times in the weeks that followed. Sometimes he saw the pride lounging beneath an acacia tree. Sometimes he filmed them from afar. Every time, the matriarch would lift her head and give a soft chuff of recognition. Every time, the cub, now stronger, braver, more confident, would trot toward him fearlessly. The bond had not been forgotten. Ethan knew he would remember that day for the rest of his life. The day he risked everything for a helpless cub. The day a pride of lions made room for him in their world. A day that left everyone who saw the footage utterly speechless. And as he filmed the pride moving across the horizon in a golden sweep of power and grace, he whispered the final words of his documentary. Bravery saves lives. Compassion changes worlds. And sometimes, even lions say thank you.